and share my screen. Pat, you want to get us started with the first slide?
Sure, I'll take myself off mute. Hi, everyone. We are going to start today and talk to you about how to get past languishing to flourishing, really talking about compassion and resilience. And I think we've got kind of an interesting mix of some practical skills or things to think about and use, and also some interesting sort of background information as well, kind of interspersed with it all. Feel free, we're a small group, so feel free to jump in with comments or, you know, whatever you need to do. That's great. And we know it's late in the day, so do what you need to do to get a snack, or have a child in your lap, whatever works. Hi, Nadia. You want to go to the next slide? I'm Pat Sidmore, and I am the Healthy Schools Specialist at Public Health. And so I'm kind of the liaison between Public Health and the Department of Education and schools, all things related to health. Sharon? And
I'm Sharon Fishel. I am the Mental Health and School Counseling Specialist at the Department of Education, also here in Juneau.
And I'm Vanessa Shannon. I'm the Mental Health Education Specialist with Department of Education as well. Next slide. So thank you so much for joining us from wherever you are. I just want to acknowledge that all of us are on Indigenous lands. And for me here in the interior in Fairbanks, I just want to recognize that I here am taking place in the territory of the traditional and original inhabitants of this land, the Tanana Quitana. And we say their name in this meeting to remind us of their culture and their way of life, and their special relationship to their land. And I just encourage you to think about the people whose land you are on and take time to reflect on that as well. So go ahead and drop in the chat your name, your role in your district, and then maybe something that you have learned about yourself or from other people around you during this pandemic that's either helped you or something you've learned about yourself. See who's in the room. Or feel free to unmute. We are a small group. And Kathy, where are you from again?
I am in Point Hope.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us today.
You are more than welcome.
And Susan. Yeah. Susan says, I've learned things I don't want to know during the pandemic. That's a great point too. Thank you. Tyler, thanks for joining us from Juneau. You learned a fair amount about the need for community support. Yeah. Supanika, learn how creative my kids are, especially with cardboard boxes. Yeah, for sure. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. Oh, Grace is coming in from Sitka, learning that I get stir crazy without hobbies. Yes. Well, good. We're going to talk about some of that a little bit so that we can get into flow. Oh, Kyle from South Peninsula and Homer learned how to better connect to community resources. Excellent. Good. Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for spending your afternoon here. Next slide. All right, so today we are just going to start with understanding the current mental health landscape. There has been some really cool projects happening across the state with Department of Ed and stakeholders and the public and other stakeholders. And then there's participants here today will understand and recognize how the pandemic is really affecting everybody, and we'll reflect on what kind of resources you need. And then also learn about resources that are available to them, just like Kyle was sharing how to better connect to community, but also trauma engaged resources available to you and your staff in the school setting too. So that's what we'll do today.
So a lot of this work that this series of trainings are about really comes out of the Education Challenge, which was initiated back in 2016. And there were 3 areas of stakeholders from across the state participated in this and came up with priority lists. And there were 3, encourage responsible reading. You see that the gold moon there at the bottom, increase student achievement at the top, and then the blue one, cultivate safety and well-being, so that all schools will be safe and nourishing to students and nourish their well-being. And so from that, we're transforming schools climate, right? The school climate, as we know, is essential not only for learning, but for growing and developing not just academic skills, but those, what some people call soft skills, relationships that are so important to be successful. The trauma engaged school work, while many think it came out of this, secretly it was happening before, but certainly was adopted into this. And then the other piece was to expand counselors and school nurses and social workers into schools, and actually Vanessa's presence here is part of that. So it's kind of a great great effort to focus and is being updated by the current school board. They're re-looking at this again and seeing where they want to go. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about a project that's kind of halfway through. The Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority, with partners in the Division of Behavioral Health and in public health and at the Department of Education and Early Development, and others interested in school mental health, surveyed school districts across the state about what they're doing in terms of mental health in the schools. There's a link in this report or to the first report, that first wave. And not only does it have outcomes for the state, but each of the districts that participated, and I'll give you some more details about that in a second. There's a kind of a 2 or 3 page summary of what is going on in those districts, and we learned just some really interesting things. And there's another wave that's going to happen where we're going to survey behavioral health providers to see how they're interacting with schools from their perspective, and bring in some more, so we get a better picture about how to help schools respond to the mental health crisis that the Surgeon General just talked about for youth, that just came out this week, but that of course many of us have known about for a while as a result of COVID and just other things. So let's take a look at the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about this survey. So I think it's 32 districts now have been surveyed, and at that link you can read about what each school district said. That covered more than 91% of the kids in the state, and the areas that we asked about were mental health concerns, what sort of fundamental things underneath that you need to build a strong school with a good climate, what supports around mental health, what impacts and barriers there are to it, and then what would be an ideal system in each community, because we know it would look different in Anchorage and Point Hope, and Juneau and Sitka and wherever we are in the state. So again, the there's a overall report and then a synthesis of the 31, not a synthesis, but an individual one. So next slide, and we'll let Vanessa tell you a little bit about what's been going on.
All right, so obviously the impacts of COVID-19 in schools were really pervasive for not only individuals, but districts and communities, and they were discussed in almost all areas when districts were interviewed. So for individuals, pandemic impacts manifested in the forms of issues such as stress, anxiety, burnout for staff, and observations of increased needs among students that some predicted could continue into this school year, 2021, 2022. Isolation, trauma, depression, and anxiety were all anecdotal examples of pandemic-related impacts among students. And the increase in need put pressure on all tiers of supports. So from universal tier 1 to tier 3 that are more intensive, maybe therapeutic, and really delivery of social emotional learning programs and mental health services were really disruptive to different degrees. Some had to completely pause and others just adapted to virtual delivery. And what was really common was identification of students was challenging in virtual interactions. So virtual environments just made it harder to either contact or even deliver services to students. A lot of that had to do with connectivity or just students disengaging. And then there was expansion of virtual supports and tools, was viewed in mixed sentiment given the preference for in-person delivery. But really, remote districts are finding some success benefits from the integration of telehealth services that were reinforced during COVID-19. Some instances, students are able to visit with providers on site at the school building or local clinic, really reducing that need to go back and forth from clinic to school. So next slide. Districts are using a range of approaches. And internal and external resources to really address student mental health. These combinations generally allow districts to provide some level of social emotional learning and mental health supports and services. However, the level of services and supports really differ from districts, rural, urban, really depended. And then districts were asked to really outline their mental health services and supports in the context of multi-tiered systems of support. And most districts have some sort of services and supports at all 3 levels of tiers, with some exceptions. But a lot of the barriers that districts identified were that delivery, really having alignment as a district of resources, maybe availability, access to those resources, and then just external influences as communities. But community partnerships were really valuable in overcoming some of these challenges. Districts discussed alignment and consistency in the context of strengths, goals, and barriers. So situations were described where district priority of maybe social emotional learning and mental health services and supports can lack focus or maybe continuity and really dedicated time, and also a pressure for academic performance versus mental health and social emotional learning, and really just limited bandwidth, right, for during the pandemic and time for training and professional development were all discussed throughout. So another thing that was really important to discuss was community partnerships are crucial for those deeper level tier 3 therapeutic services. So those are really critical to supporting students in that continuum. All right, we've got a question. Can you give examples of what the range of services and supports would be? So for tier 1, universal supports might be teacher embedding social emotional learning into their content academic material, or it could look like school counselors doing SEL lessons or presentations. And then tier 2 might be a more targeted support where we might have a group of students that are more needing support in different areas. Maybe it's anti-bullying, or maybe it's just social skills. That would be a tier 2. And tier 3 would be more intensive therapeutic. So one-on-one with parent partnerships and getting into those deeper level support so students can succeed in the classroom. Is that helpful, Supanika? Great question.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Okay. And there's different curriculums and different programs at each tier. It just really depends on districts, resources, and what the kiddos need really at their levels. All right.
So I know many of you know about the hand model of the brain. So we're not going to show the video or go into great depth. If you haven't seen it, the link is here. But I will say, just having some common language around how our brains react to stress is such a great thing. I had an interesting experience. I've done this with kindergartners and they get it. Last week or week before, I actually went into the local prison here and did it with a group of men. And I followed up later with the therapist that I did the session with. And she was saying, yeah, they're definitely using the hand model of the brain to describe their stress response and what they do with it. I just think it's a really great tool. So if you haven't seen it, go ahead and look at the video, but it's just a great way to talk about and have common language about what's going on with us when we're under stress. So I won't go into more detail than that, but take a look at it if you haven't seen it. Next slide, please. So I want to show you a little bit of some results from the 2021 School Climate and Connectedness Survey, which is done by the Association of Alaska School Boards. It is not a representative sample of the state, but it is a big sample of about 20 to 25% of the school staff in this case. Took that survey, and you can see the breakout of some of what I'm going to show you. Almost 2,500 teachers, down to as low as 154 administrators, but lots of school staff. And we'll show the next slide, and you'll get a sense of just some of the questions they answered. And that first one across the top, I understand how the experience of trauma can affect a person's coping skills and behaviors. Wow, in almost every category of school staff that was surveyed, people said, yeah, they really did understand that. And so that's an exciting thing. And then the next question down, at my school, I feel supported to respond to trauma experienced by students. And you can see how that breaks out still really good. 2/3 of teachers said they felt that way. Obviously, we want all of that to be higher, but you get a sense of where different school staff in that grouping of schools that were surveyed. But here's the big one, right? And it really gets to kind of the topic of our conversation. And this is reversed, right? So we want big numbers to be positive. We want big numbers. So it says, I don't feel worn out by my work in ways that interfere with other parts of my life. So what we want is big numbers because we don't want them worn out by their work. And what we see is that only 23% of teachers are doing what I would say doing okay with that question, right? So almost 77% are at least neutral, or yeah, I'm pretty worn out in a way from my work that impacts the rest of my life. And you can see that breakout. This matters because how we feel has such an impact, not only on ourselves and our family and our friends, but also on our work, because so much of education is relational. And so that's kind of led us to think that maybe this topic today about languishing and flourishing could be helpful for school staff. Next one. You're on mute, Sharon.
Of course I'm muted. Today we're gonna switch now to talk a little bit about you, your family, your experiences, what you might be feeling. And everybody's kind of been feeling a little blah. And that feeling is called languishing. And we're going to talk a little bit about languishing and how to rediscover your flow. How many of you have had friends mention that they were having trouble concentrating? Colleagues reporting that even with vaccines, they weren't excited about the FY22 school year? Or have caught yourself staying up late watching a movie you've seen 100 times? Or instead of just bouncing out of bed when your alarm goes off, you're flipping through your phone or playing a game on your phone. I'm not one who has ever bounced right out of bed in the morning. So pandemic has nothing to do with that. So in the chat box, I want you to put some of the other things that you have noticed during the pandemic. There's lots of different symptoms that we all kind of have in common. What are some of those? Or you can unmute yourself and just chat. Like we said, it's a small group. Hard to concentrate or track conversations. Less interested in hobbies. What else do we got? Putting off projects. What have you noticed? Indecisive. What am I making for dinner? Exactly. Sometimes it's just easier to order pizza if that's available to you. Not eating very healthy. If it wasn't burnout, we still had energy. It wasn't depression. We didn't feel hopeless. We just felt somewhat joyless and aimless. A name for that is languishing. Languishing is a sense of stagnation and emptiness. How many of you feel like you're muddling through your days, looking at your life through a foggy windshield? Many people are struggling with the emotional long haul of the pandemic. And with that, we are suffering with a chronic condition of languish.
In psychology, we think about mental health sometimes like on a spectrum from depression to flourishing. And flourishing is usually the peak of well-being. We feel like we have a strong sense of meaning, maybe mastery of skills or our career, and we feel like we really matter to other people. And depression is sometimes like a valley of ill-being. We might feel despondent and really drained and kind of worthless. That void between depression and flourishing is really the absence of well-being. You might not have symptoms of mental illness, but you're not the picture of mental health either. And we're not functioning at true full capacity. Languishing dulls our motivation, can really disrupt our ability to focus. So maybe like indecisiveness, what we're making for dinner. And it really can triple the odds that we're going to cut back on work and not be as productive as we may have been in the past. And it appears to be more common than major depression. And in some ways, it might be a bigger risk factor for future mental health issues. The term languishing was coined by a sociologist named Corey Keyes, who was struck that many people who weren't depressed also weren't thriving. And his research suggests that the people most likely to experience major depression and anxiety disorders in the next decade aren't the ones with those symptoms today. It's the people who are languishing right now.
You don't necessarily catch yourself slipping slowly into solitude. You're indifferent to your indifference. When you can't see your own suffering, you don't seek help or even do much for yourself. Even if you're not languishing, you probably know people who are. Understanding it can better help you help them. So on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you right now? We got some 7s, some 8s, 6 and 7. Another 7. We're doing pretty good. We're headed into that holiday season, right? Everybody's just a little bit better than they might have been a week ago. Awesome. How about the people around you? Where are they at? It could be your family, your colleagues, your friends. Where are they at? Got a 5. Wide range, Kyle. Yep. Depends on which group. Absolutely, Tyler.
So it's one of the things that that we wanted to talk a little bit about is grief, and Sharon and I did a lot of sessions on this with faculty around the state last year, and I think it's important to continue to acknowledge it, because there's still, especially for kids, but for all of us, there's some loss that we've experienced, loss of agency and loss of connections, and so I think grief is a helpful way to think about it. And so this next slide, when we first kind of conceptualized the grief, there were these 5 stages, and sometimes now there's another stage, which is kind of beyond acceptance, but I forget the word. Anyway, just building it into a positive thing. But when we first looked at this model, we thought it was kind of a linear thing, that you started with denial and then you went to anger and bargaining. And so when you think about denial in this, I mean, thinking back to the beginning, I was on a call today and one of my colleagues was, remember when we thought we would lock down for about 3 or 4 weeks and this would be over, and there was kind of a little bit of maybe not realistic about what was coming. Anyway, that can be denial, and then anger, of course. You're making me stay home. We're taking away activities. We've certainly seen a lot of that and felt a lot of that, for sure. And then the bargaining, again, if we can just get through this, if we can just get to next month, we can get those numbers down, and then we can go back to normal. Lots of bargaining around that. Depression and sadness, we see that. I don't know when this will ever end, that hopelessness that sometimes we can fall into. And then finally, some sort of acceptance, right? This is happening, I've figured it out. And realistically, we've probably been there in different points. If you want to, in the chat box, you want to put, is there a place in the grief when you think about what's been going on with the pandemic that you're at right now? Or just think about it, or say it, or whatever. Acceptance, yeah, it's been going on a while, hasn't it? There's been a lot of time to process. Well, as you think about it, what we've really learned is that the model really, in practicality, doesn't look like that we bounce all over the place, right? Sometimes we're mad, sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're in that acceptance phase, and that is normal. That's a normal part of grief, and sometimes we cycle around and around for a while, and eventually we do get to some sort of acceptance and accommodation if we can really circle ourselves around supportive people and support each other. So anyway, I think it's just a healthy way to think about it, and to not only to think about it for yourself, but to think about it for others, and some of the reactions we get from people sometimes, if we think about it through this lens, may help us offer a little grace to them and when we think about ourselves, offer a little grace to ourselves too. So when we think about languishing, kind of in that interim between things, we still have a lot to learn. But what we've learned, if nothing else, just from our small group, is that some of these feelings are pretty common, given what's going on, and there's some camaraderie and hope in that, I think. Sharon.
So instead of saying great or fine, imagine if we answered honestly, I'm languishing. It would be a refreshing foil for toxic positivity that quintessentially Americans pressure to be upbeat all the time. We're always pressured. And when you add languishing to your text, you start to notice it all around you. It shows up when you feel let down by your short afternoon walk. It's in your kids' voices when you ask how school went. Which one of these pictures on the screen is you right now? The center one is Tyler. We're going to talk about that, Tyler, in a minute. Rest of you, where are you at? Bottom right, yeah, I hear you. Supanika's berry picking, awesome. Top left, yep. Bottom right. So just for a minute, I would like for everybody to turn on their cameras. You can turn them off when we're done with this activity, but everybody turn on your cameras. I want to see your smiling faces. There we go. Kathy, where are you at? I'm calling you out, Kathy.
Hold on, my internet is unstable here.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll
why.
let you go. I'll just know that you're doing what I'm telling you to do, right?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, so everybody take your finger, put it on your head. And when you find yourself flat down in the middle of the road, I want you to think about who you're going to call, text, to talk you out of the middle of the road, because we don't want a bus coming and running you over. So make a mental note of who you're going to call to talk you off that cliff. All right. Thank you for participating. You can keep your cameras on or turn them off, whatever works best for you.
That's Sharon. She's a good non-directive counselor. Whoops, she'll tell you what to do.
It's called reality therapy, I think.
There you go.
All right. Vanessa, all yours.
Yeah, so I don't know about many of you, but I know I'm guilty of this. Many of us have revenge of bedtime procrastination. We just stay up way too late trying to reclaim the freedom that we might not have during the daytime, or this is the only space and time of my schedule where I can have complete control, or it's maybe our quiet defiance against languishing. A lot of times we just spend a lot of times mindlessly scrolling or binge watching Netflix, which isn't the most healthy way to spend our time, but really it can be a search for bliss in a bleak day maybe, or it can be a connection in a lonely week. We like the predictability of our favorite show. Any Office fans out there? I know exactly what kind of humor I'm going to get when I turn that on. It's comforting, the routine of that. Or sometimes that space is really purpose in a perpetual pandemic. Really, a lot of our screen times is us trying to seek that control or brain space that we just don't have typically because we might be languishing during the day.
So what can we do about it? A concept called flow may be an antidote to languishing. Flow is that elusive state of absorption. I can't talk anymore today. In a meaningful challenge or momentary bond when your sense of time, place, and self just melts away. During the early days of the pandemic, the best predictor of well-being wasn't optimism or mindfulness, it was flow. People who became more immersed in their projects managed to avoid languishing and maintain their pre-pandemic happiness. An early morning word game might catapult you into your flow. A late night Netflix binge sometimes does the trick. It transports you into a story where you feel attached to the characters and concerned about their welfare. I'm going to date myself, but Days of Our Lives, the soap opera, started the year I was born, and I record it every day, and I watch it a lot of times, and that's just kind of my escape. I grew up with the characters. I know what's happening. I know, Pat, I'm dating myself.
You know, like sands through the hourglass. So
Those
are the days of our
our
lives.
lives. Absolutely. So we can find new challenges and enjoyable experiences and meaningful work that are all possible remedies to languishing. It's hard to find flow when you can't focus. This was a problem long before the pandemic, when people were habitually checking email 74 times a day and switching tasks every 10 minutes. Oh, I'm going to clean this. Oh, that's dirty. Let me clean that. And then nothing gets cleaned. In the past year, many of us have also been struggling with interruptions from kids from around the house, colleagues around the world, bosses around the clock. Meh. Fragmented attention is an enemy of engagement and excellence. Sometimes it's a small step toward rediscovering some of the energy and enthusiasm that you've missed during all of these months. How do you escape the feeling of meh?
Not just in our heads, it's in our circumstances. And we still live in a world that normalizes physical health challenges, but still stigmatizes mental health challenges, unfortunately. And as we head into a new post-pandemic reality, it's time to rethink our understanding of mental health and well-being. Next slide. Oh, by acknowledging that so many of us are languishing, we can start giving voice to quiet despair and lighting a path out of the void. Start normalizing that meh feeling that we all can feel sometimes.
You know, prior to the pandemic, people of a different generation than me would always use that word. And I really didn't know what that word meant until the pandemic hit. Now I understand what that word means. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Transforming Schools, a framework for trauma-engaged practice, which most of you have a copy of. We have our online toolkit that goes with that. We have some upcoming resources. On our website, we have our milestone guide, Transforming Schools Knowing to Doing video library, Transforming Schools Trauma-Engaged social media campaign. Those are all resources that can be found on the department's trauma site. And if you want copies of the framework for your staff or coworkers, you can just email me and we will get some in the mail to you. Kat, this one's yours.
Sorry, I must have looked away. Hey, one of the things that's great about the framework is that while there are people's names on the as authors, realistically, actually 200 or 300 people around Alaska are authors of the framework, and it's actually gotten some notice. Some folks at the American Institutes for Research wrote a really interesting paper about some promising practices around the globe, and out of 5 of them, and one of them was this one. And that's really, I think, kudos to Alaska and all the work of people here and their insight and wisdom. And it's not just the science, it's that deep cultural wisdom that's just kind of baked into our land and our people in so many great ways. And I will say the other thing we learned just recently is that there was another think tank that was writing about some of these topics, and they contacted us, and we asked after they interviewed us, they said, how did you get here? And they said, we were talking to the Chicago school system, which is, by the way, the third largest school system in the country. And they said, you got to talk to Alaska. They got it going on. And it was about this work. So just it's cool. And what's great about it is nobody owns it. It's in the public domain, and it was written by us. So we can use it, we can improve it, and we can share it, which is I think a big Alaskan value. The other thing, you're here, so you already know about the Alaska Healthy Schools Learning Collaborative. There's a lot of great sessions. The link is there. There are, oh gosh, I don't know how many recordings of earlier sessions that are out there. People are watching it. They're hopefully using it with each other and sharing it around. It's on YouTube. We'll have this session posted within a couple days. So feel free to go out there. I think, Vanessa, you mentioned listening to our grandmothers and scientists. There have been 4 of those sessions so far, and 2 more in the next year, in January, I think, maybe 1 in February. But anyway, those are coming, and there's going to be more that will get added to the schedule. So lots of things to look at. Either come in person, watch on video, and if you have ideas for us, or you want to do some presentations on some knowledge that you have to help schools around school health in the broadest sense of that term, let us know, because we are interested in sharing that. So it's just a resource. And now I think Vanessa gets to talk about some of what she's been doing.
Yeah, so I am one of the mental health education specialists. I'm Sharon's counterpart. And I am so glad to be here. My position is funded with Alaska Mental Health Trust Authority throughout 2023, and its really focus is on COVID recovery and response. And the services are listed there, but the aim overall is to support mental health well-being to rural and remote districts who don't always have access to a school counselor or school social worker. And every year there's about a dozen. So that's part of the series, or I'm sorry, part of the position is to focus on well-being and trauma-engaged schools and support to staff and community well-being. So thanks. And if you're not aware, we also have really great e-learning courses on DEED. Several topics also have hands-on activities. So classroom practices, emotional intelligence, mind-body connection, self-regulation. These are awesome. If you haven't looked into these, they're very comprehensive and available and free. So feel free to dig in there and check those out and let us know if you did.
Tyler's on here. He's one of our colleagues from the Association of Alaska School Boards. They've been an amazing partner in the trauma work between Department of Education and Early Development and AASB. Those two are really have taken the lead, but with, again, like I said, lots of other people. They have also developed a framework for family partnerships. This is so much about community and so much about making the schools fit in the community. And so they have this resource that's truly tremendous, and much like the framework, has beautiful art in it as well. So it's not only got great information written by Alaskans again, but has beautiful art created by Alaskans about Alaskans. So check it out if you haven't seen. And then they also have not only a mirrored a website of what's on the Department of Education framework, but they have this incredible thing, and I showed you some of that data early on about school climate and connectedness. an amazing resource for schools to look at. Surveys third through fifth graders in one survey, 6th through 12th graders in another, school staff and families. A great resource to really dig into what your community thinks about important issues in the schools. Lots of other resources there at that website as well.
And just so everybody knows that the Alaska Care Line is always there if you are in crisis or you need somebody to talk to. We want to thank all of you for all of your hard work and what you do for kids, and challenge you all to do something for yourselves over the next couple of weeks of holiday. And there's a couple of, if you download the PowerPoint, there's going to be a couple of videos that are at the back that are for, Pat, why don't you describe those?
Sure. So there are two. The first one, I think this is the older kids one. There are two short, few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, videos about anxiety that are actually wonderful to look at. They're great for adults too. I actually like the younger kid one for adults. But it just explains how anxiety works, much like the hand model of the brain that we talked about. It explains it in a great, easily digestible way. They're out of Canada, a place called, or a resource called Anxiety Canada that's got some wonderful stuff on it. And then there's the right after these two videos, there's one more resource that Sharon can talk about.
Just to let you know that the department still has on their website the messages of hope, banners, little cards and things that you can print out and give to people or put up in your windows. So again, thank you for joining us today, and I hope you all have a very happy holiday.
Thank you, and happy holidays to all of you as well.